Well, good evening, everyone. So welcome to one of the last sessions of Ticket 2010. So this session is about building BCS solutions using Visual Studio 2010. Not that it's going to be deep dive session, so I'm not going to go deep. I'm going to take it and keep it simple. Not much of deep dive things that we're going to do with the demos, just build BCS models. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to see a quick BCS overview. So how many of you came to my session yesterday? Great. So it was nice and easy with SharePoint Designer 2010. It's not going to be nice and easy with Visual Studio. You have to go and do certain things to make it work. But it's still much better than what you might be doing with BDC 2007. So we're going to create BDC models, write some operations to create them, update them, and delete them. So we're going to see more demos. So we're going to do more practical demos than going through the slides and spending much time on them. So what is BCS? In a nutshell, it's going to provide you some set of capabilities and features that let you connect to the external data systems and bring the data back to SharePoint. So do you mind if I skip these slides? Because most of you attended yesterday to my session. Yep, cool. So this is where the BCS in SharePoint 2010 comes in picture. We still have the BDC acronym, which is going to be the business data connectivity that helps to maintain the connectivity options to the external data systems and external data sources, which might be anything from your custom line of business to WCF service or custom database. And finally, this extends to the Office client, so you could use them in Office Word, PowerPoint, Excel, sorry, not PowerPoint, sorry, Outlook, and InfoPath and clients, other Office clients. So this is where this is how the whole thing works, right? So you have this thing called connectors, which are going to connect to your external data sources. So if you use SharePoint Designer, then it's pretty easy. You go there, create a new external content type, specify what is your data source, SQL Server or a WCF service, or what's the other one? .NET assembly, right? So that gives you a way that you could interact with your external data source. So that's what the layer above your external data source is. And that's being handled by the BDC, which is business data connectivity. So that takes care of these connectors and methods and operations that operate on these external data source. So once you have this BDC, everything is going to get stored in a BDC metadata store, which is handled by the BDC service application in SharePoint 2010. And once that's all in place, now you can use the presentation features in SharePoint, present it as an external list, external data column, or whichever way you want to present it. Nice and easy. And now this extends to the client using the BDC client runtime. So there's something called this BDC client runtime that actually handles all this BDC stuff so that it can render in Office client apps. So that has a client data cache where everything gets stored and manipulated. Client data cache updates probably, I think there's something that time that goes and updates, takes a cache of what is available and then presents it to the client. And that's how the whole thing works. So you have your BDC runtime, BDC client application for clients, and they both interact with the BDC metadata store to get data from your external data source. So, by the way, what you're going to do today is build one of those connectors, which is .NET assembly connector. So yesterday we built DB connector using SharePoint Designer 2010, which was just using SQL Server and going to your database, creating all the operations. You could, however, have done with WCF using SharePoint Designer 2010. And today we'll build something with .NET assembly and see how we go about building those things. Tooling support, as we saw yesterday, we have SharePoint Designer 2010, and we also have Visual Studio 2010 for advanced coding technology. So a little bit around what are external content types. So they're going to describe the schema and the various capabilities that can get involved when interacting with your external data source. So the methods and operations, and they present your data to SharePoint as well as the Office clients. So you could have an external content type called customer with some properties, probably last name, first name, email, and some methods to actually fetch the data. So we literally didn't use Visual Studio yesterday. So everything was SharePoint Designer 2010. We didn't even write any code. So what are the different things you could do without Visual Studio, and what are the things that you might require custom code? So you might require to use Visual Studio and build solutions on top of it. So BDC object model, of course, if you want to, probably you want the data to be presented in your web part, custom web part, visual web part, you might have to use the BDC object model to interact and fetch the data from the BDC metadata content type repository. SharePoint object model to interact with external list. So if you have an external list, if you want to query against that external list, fetch some data back, you will write normal sp.sp list and then get the data back how we would normally interact with a custom list in SharePoint. Client object model, which is new to SharePoint 2010. If you want to write applications that target client systems, so where that means that there's no SharePoint install, it might be your home desktop or probably a client PC which doesn't have SharePoint but still have to interact with SharePoint, which is probably in some other server. To get data back, you could use the client object model. Custom connectors, probably you would like to connect to, I don't know, Sybase or Oracle, and you wish to say, I want to write a custom connector which will ease my development in my organization so that users can just use that connector, specify the methods, and get the data back. So you could build some custom connectors. On the other hand, on the left-hand side, no-code solutions, something we saw yesterday. There are out-of-the-box web parts that help you to present the data. There are data columns that you can use across your custom list and external list, which is, I think most of us will be using extensively in BDC. Right, so let's jump on building solutions using Visual Studio. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect to my SQL server and get the data back using link to SQL and build a model against it. So, however, I could have chosen a flat file or in-place memory objects, but just for the fact that I can show you that you could still use some other technology like link to SQL in your BDC model, and I thought let's do that demo. So I'm going to create a new project. How many of you have used Visual Studio Tools for SharePoint 2010? Do you like it? Much better than the Visivis, which is for 2007, right? So this has a project template called Business Data Connectivity Model, which will help you get started with building the BDC models you want. So let me choose some other location, probably take it, right. External products. So I'm going to connect to a products database in AdventureWorks. Sorry, products table in AdventureWorks database and fetch the products record. So it's going to ask me where do you want to do. So BCS is only possible when you deploy it as a farm solution, because BCS is going to get stored. It stores all of your external content types in a BDC metadata store, which is handled by a BDC service application. So it has to be obviously a farm solution so that it's available over the whole farm. So it's going to go create me all the, the usual Microsoft thing, which makes it much easier by giving a working model that you can right away deploy and see what it does for you, right? So now I have my solution. You can see here I have the solution with the feature, with the BDC model, and then there's something called BDCM. So this is a BDC model file. So if I double click on this, it's going to open up this guy over here, the BDCM, which is going to give me, it's a visual designer where I can go and design my BDC entity. So for example, this can be a customer, right? So for our sample, I said we're going to go and get some products back. So what I'll do is I'll make it external product. So now we have started designing how our entity is going to look. So Visual Studio gave us really good start. It gave us just a sample entity 1 and as an identifier 1, and then 2 methods, read list and read item. So if you noticed yesterday, I told you that you at least need 2 methods to create an external list, read item and read list. So by default, Visual Studio gives you these 2 methods. Now if you click on those 2 methods, it's directly going to take you to the source code. So if you see the source code, all it does is some code that's going on by default, right? Gets the entity, assigns some value to the entity, return the entity. So what I'll do is I'll change this back to entity 1. Right? And I'll press F5. So we'll deploy this and see what happens, whether I'm able to create an external list and what I'm going to get with that external list. How many of you have tried this, by the way? 1, 2. So good. Right. So it's going to give me, there were some errors. Do you want to continue or not? So no, I don't want to continue. Sorry. So what is this error? It says that the default web application could not be determined, set the site URL property, right? So this was one of the changes from RC to RTM, from beta to RTM. So what happened was Microsoft decided that, okay, this BDC can be exported and it's going to go along different stages and different farms. Probably your development might be a separate farm, your production can be totally independent farm. So in order to make that consistent and make this BDC model exportable in different environments, they said, okay, let me not put the web URL in the feature where it's going to say, okay, here's my web URL, I'm going to directly deploy the BDC model over there. Instead, I will let the developers choose where they want to use it. So if I go to my Solution Explorer, you can see that Visual Studio has created a feature for me. So if I go to my Feature Designer, where I could go and design the properties for this feature, go to my manifest. So if you edit, so this is the dynamic manifest XML editor. So whatever you write here will be inserted by Visual Studio when you deploy this feature. So you don't have to go and edit the actual XML that you find in the feature folder. So I'm going to copy this. I'm going to paste. So you can see on the top it has added, it should add, so it has added this part. So I'm going to change this to site URL and give it a value where I am deploying the solution to. Right? So when whatever changes you do here, it gets added to the original manifest file above. So you don't have to go and edit the raw XML file. So I'm going to save it. I'm going to deploy. So hopefully now things will work. Any doubts so far? It's going to take some time to deploy. Cool, deploy succeeded. Any doubts probably from yesterday's session? Oh, come on, feel free to ask anything. Maybe anything in SharePoint 2010 you want to know? Well, this gets loaded. Oh, there you go, you missed your chance. More options. So let me go and create an external list and see whether I'm able to find my model that I just deployed. Right, so I'll just say, okay, products. Come on. There you go, we have our .NET assembly that we just deployed. So now when I choose it and create the external list, we got our entity, the values. It's just one value which is hello world. So if you actually see what's happening, let me put a breakpoint. Let me put a breakpoint here. So there are two methods, right? Read list and read item. So how does the SharePoint runtime decides to, call which method? Call the methods. So when it's going to, when I refresh this list, so when I click on products, it's going to call the read list method. So you can see it's coming to read list. So what's going to happen is SharePoint needs all the data the total number of data that it needs to display in the external list. So it goes to this read list method, gets all the entity, there you go, and returns the entity list. So puts it in a list and then returns that list. And we get the items in the external list. So now what happens if I go and click the item? Now the read item method gets called, where the identifier that what you have specified in the model gets passed, comes as a parameter to this method. So you can see the ID is 0. And it goes and, just fetches the ID, does some random weird things here. So actually there's no business logic or anything here, going on here. It's just a sample for you to understand what's going on, how it works. So now it displays that entity, right? Simple, nice and easy way to get started. As you can see, I don't have option to edit this item or delete this item because I haven't specified the methods and operations for editing and deleting this item. So now I can close this. I'll stop debugging, right? If I go back, everyone enjoyed TechFest last night? Good? Right, so let's make this interactive, much more interactive session. What's going to happen if I click on products? If I click on the products list, what's going to happen? If I click on products, come on, just try. What's going to happen? Will SharePoint throw me error, or will SharePoint display the, that 0 hello world list item, or I will get a blue screen of death. I don't want that to happen, but any guesses? Come on, I don't have a prize to give away, but I can be proud that you answered the question. Right, so let's do this. So I'm going to click on products. Oh, I'm getting an error. So why am I getting an error? We just deployed, right? We just deployed, we debugged, we did everything, but why am I getting an error?
Because when you stop debugging, it rejects the solution.
Exactly, right. So I don't know whether it's a nice thing or it's just an added benefit of using Visual Studio, debugging in Visual Studio. So if you hit F5, what Visual Studio does is it compiles, it builds, it deploys a solution to the site where you have specified. And then finally, when you stop debugging, it retracts that solution from the site. So even if it's a web part that you are trying to debug, if you add the web part to the page and then close the, stop debugging, you're not going to get the web part in your site. So you have to deploy. So you have to go choose deploy. Explicitly to permanently deploy the solution to the site. Otherwise, if you use F5, what it does is it retracts after debugging. So that's why we are not seeing our model over there. That's good. That's fine because we're going to do some updates to this guy. So let me open up my model again. So now let's go and change this model the way we want, right? So we want to get products, external products. So let me go and do some changes. So I'm changing the entity name to external products. And then I'm going to change this guy identifier to just ID, right? So now if I go to my BDC Explorer, you can see that I'm able to see an hierarchical view of my BDC model, my instance, my entity name over here, and the methods that are available in that entity. So let me go and change this to external products. External products, right? So now if I expand these two methods, I can see that there are more things going on inside, right? I have something called ID, I have something called return parameter, again I have something called return parameter. So what are these? So these are going to define what are your parameters, right? So a parameter is something, maybe a return value or an input that is being given to a function, like a normal C# thing, what you would probably learn the initial thing when you start writing methods. So this read item method, you can say that it has a parameter called ID and type descriptor called identifier1. So what is this type descriptor? Type descriptor is something that you can say the actual parameter. So you can say this is a parameter name which can identify that parameter, and that's going to have the type descriptor identifier1, which it says that for this parameter I will get an object of the type identifier1. Right? Confused? Okay, we'll see how it works, right? And then there's another parameter named return parameter. So by the name you would have guessed something is going to get returned, but what is going to get returned? Entity 1. So now it makes sense? You have a name to that parameter, and then you specify what is that parameter. So you can see here that we obviously changed to entity 1 to external products, but that didn't get populated, or that didn't update my BDC XML, right, the BDC model hierarchy. So I have to go and do those changes. So what I'll do is, so before going that, there's something here called BDC method details. So this is just an extra panel that gives you more information about the methods. The methods meaning the read list, read item. So this is where you can see that you have a method read list, you have parameters, and what are those parameters, and the direction. So what parameter is it? Is it in parameter or out parameters? Instead of out, it is return. If you see here, you can differentiate between the two parameters. And the type descriptor associated with that parameter. So what information is actually being returned. And you can go and add methods, right? So you can go and add creator method, deleter method, finder method, updater method. Right? So just keep in mind, we'll come later to this. So now what I'm going to do is, as I've changed my identifier to ID, I'm going to go and change. So let me see, I can put this here, right? So name of my identifier, let me make it ID. And I want to change this to external products because we changed there. So you have to do this work because I know it is time consuming, but for your model, once you understand what it is and what you actually want to do, you could do it in no time, right? So go and say, okay, I need external products. And if you click on external products, you can see here that this external product has two type descriptors, identifier 1 and message. So what it says is, my product is of type external products class probably, and has two properties, identifier 1 and message. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to say, okay, I know I've changed this ID, and I'm going to change this to name. So my product is going to have an ID, have a name, and I can add another type descriptor, and I'm going to say number. So my product is going to have an ID, name, and number. Simple. So I'm going to wrap that into a type descriptor called external product. If you click on external product, you can see here there is a type name, So what is this type name? It's looking back to a class, right? So just keep in mind that it's going to look back to a class. We'll go and see what that class is later once we have specified our model. So don't worry about classes, everything right now. We're going to build our model first. So that's going to be our design phase. So what we have done is we have built the read item method now, which is going to take a parameter ID and return you a product. A product will have an ID, a name, and a number associated with it, right? Simple? Great. So now what we need with read list, we need to return a number of products, right? So what that means is that it's going to have a return parameter of external products list. So it's going to return me a list of external products. Nice and simple. So I'm going to say external products list. So what that external products list type descriptor is going to have? External product. So we just defined our external product. I probably have to say, I have to remove doesn't make sense make it plural. So I'll make it singular because it is singular. So now I can go and say, right, here's my external product. I've defined it and this is what it is. So I can copy this, right? And I can delete this entity 1 because I don't want it. And I can right click here and paste. So now what it says, okay, here's your read list method. What am I supposed to return? A list of external products. So I have a list of external products, which is nothing but the list will have a type descriptor of external product, which is going to have an ID, name, and a number. Clear? No confusions? Right. So, I think we have defined our initial model. So we are ready to go and see whether we can pull the data back. So before that, I said that the external product is associated with a class. So if you go to your Solution Explorer, under your BDC model, you can see that you have two classes, entity1.cs and external product service.cs. So that has changed from our solution. So if I click on entity 1, you can see that here's the class. Right? You have class entity 1, identifier 1, message. But we have changed these things. But the visual designer didn't modify this. So I'm going to go ahead and change this to external product, to the name of my entity. Now once I change this, it's going to change. So what is my external product is going to have? It's going to have an ID. It's going to have name. And it's going to have a number. Right? So now you see that how the design phase is helping us to build our code. Right? So now we have designed our model. Now we know, okay, these are the things we need. So now we can go back to the code. So your BA can design the model, right? He or she need not know about the code, what is going to happen. So you have the freedom to let your BA decide, okay, what is going to be the entity, how things are going to work, what operations you need. And now you can export that from the BA, import it into Visual Studio, and put the code behind, right? Much better, right? So you get the freedom of getting the feedback from other people. Not that you're going to, do without them. So they're going to come in and say, no, I don't want this. I want, identifier, not ID. So, yeah. So we have our class, which defines our external products. So now we will go and see this external product service. So there you go. This is the class that is going to have the operations defined and the code that actually executes for those operations. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add some link to SQL classes that will help us write less code. So add a new item, data, link to SQL, and I'm going to call it AdventureWorks. Gives me the link to SQL Visual Designer. Go to my Server Explorer. I probably have it connected. Great. So how many of you have used link to SQL? Do you want to know what it is for others? Do you know what it is? Yeah. So it's just a easy to use tool if you are going to interact with your databases. So it generates the classes and the properties and the methods that you want to interact with the database. For example, so now I can connect to my database, bring in the products table. So I'll show you what I'm going to do now. So I want the product, right? I can drag and drop it here. It's going to say, okay, connection string contains credential or clear text password. I'll just say yes. That's fine. It's just saying that, do you want to store the password? So now you can see what I've got is, I have my product table in my Visual Designer. So now Visual Studio will generate the backend classes and properties and the methods that I need to do the CRUD operations on this products table. So it's just an easier way to interact with your databases if you just want to code. So you don't have to go and write 10 or 50 lines of code to actually, with SQL statements to insert. It's all object-oriented right now. So we'll also see how we use this with our code. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to use link to SQL in our BDC model to fetch records and update the records. So now I have my class. So you can see here it has added DBML, which is nothing but this Visual Designer. And if you see the backend class, you can see that it has added all the stuff. So it's all link, which is C# 3.0. It has added a data context. It has added a class product and has all these properties. So now it gives me the ability to do all the stuff with this table. So let me go back to my service. So I'm going to add just a string, which is going to be the connection string for my database. Nothing fancy, the usual connection string. And I'm going to change the read list method with this code, right? So what I'm doing now, so what I want to achieve is I want to return a list of external products. So I have the list over here defined, and then I'm connecting to my database using these chunk of code. So I created AdventureWorks. So the backend code creates me an AdventureWorks data context, and now I can use that data context, create a new data context based on my connection string, right? I'm passing my connection string, and now I can go ahead and say, well, from the products table, get me the first 10 records. Nice and simple, just no SQL statement, nothing. Just dot take of 10. So if you want to specify conditions, you could specify. So I can go and say, well, I need to select where, and then I can say P. So I can use all the lambda expressions where P dot, I can get everything. I can just say P dot name dot starts with probably B, right? I can do this too. I haven't tried that out, so sorry, I'm not going to use that. So nice and simple, just take 10 records. And then what I'm doing is enumerating those products result and adding it to my products list by creating a new external product and just getting ID, name, number, and then return that list back. Simple? No confusions? So now you can see that if it's not SQL Server, you could probably be even interacting with cloud storage. And right here, put in your code there. It doesn't matter where it is. So I'm going to change this read item. What my read item method does, again, It's going to use the data context. Now you can see how I have used the query expression. So use the data context, use the products table, but get me the first product which matches this condition, right? Which is get me the product with the ID, parameter ID. So that's what is going to happen. So you have your list of products. When you click on a product, it's going to come here, it's going to pass the ID, and then it's going to say, okay, now you need to fetch me exactly the same product with that ID. So this code goes to the database, gets the product with the ID, and then returns you that product, create the external product object, return the external product. Clear? So you can see that you have the freedom freedom to do what you want to do. So your model can be, SQL Server, MySQL, or cloud, or whatever it is. So it doesn't matter. All it matters is what you do in that code. So now we have built something which should work for read list and read item, and let's see whether it works. Build succeeded. Let me deploy this. Again, I'm pressing F5. And let's see whether that external list picks up these changes. Any questions so far? Yep. I just specified in my code, which is just a text. Right? And then I'm using it in the data context constructor. So if this was a .NET app, you can specify in your app.config, and it picks up from there, link to SQL. But since it's a BDC context, you don't have an app config, right? You're deploying as a model XML file. So your code needs to handle those. So that's why the constructor requires you to pass a connection string. And if you had come yesterday, there was an option to use secure store, where you store your credentials. There is a way that you could use secure store, query the secure store, get the credentials, and pass on here in your code. So if you go to my resources link, which is in the slide, you'll see the MSD and blog post on how to do that. So you could typically store all your credentials in secure store, use it, consume it in your BDC code, and connect to the external data source. Right, so let's go and see what has happened to this products list now. It doesn't work. Let me delete it. So these are little problems that you have. Sometimes it doesn't pick up the changes really fast. So it's always recommended to, if you are debugging and sort of doing stuff, it's always recommended to delete it and create it again. But obviously it's not going to be the case in your production, because you're not going to put in production until everything works. Great. So here is our product. It worked. Great. So what has happened? Our BDC model has gone to the SQL Server products table and fetched the first 10 products from the database table, right? Nice and simple. We didn't do much code. Link to SQL helped us. If you go and write the raw SQL code, it might have been probably, you might have to build your own methods and things like that. If I click on an item, great. So what has happened? It went back to the database, fetched the product for that product ID, and returned to the BDC model, which then displayed us in this nice display form. Nice and simple. And since we don't have any update method or delete method, we don't have those options enabled. So now let's go and the update option.
Is there any way to hide those buttons?
Yes. So you have to use the ribbon XML that got introduced in SharePoint 2010. So you have to write a feature where you can specify these are the items in the ribbon that I want to hide, and you can hide it.
But that doesn't pick up on the permissions that are available in the model.
No, you could I mean, you can still, I think you can do it still in your code. You can go and hide that button. So there is a C# class in the SharePoint API that you can get the ribbon context and manipulate the ribbon and say that, you could have your code checking whether this user is a member of the site, then show him this item. If not, hide the item. So that's doable, yes. Great. So I'll delete this list. So next time when we debug and deploy, let us create a new list. So what we have done now, we designed our BDC model for our external product, and then we went back and wrote the code for read item and read list methods. So that fetched all the items and also fetched a single item from the database. So now let me go to my model. By the way, if by any chance you don't get this BDC Explorer here, you can go to View, Other Windows, and you should have it here. I think once it's not here, it will get it here. Yeah, but that's the place to find if you don't have the BDC Explorer window displayed. Now, why am I not getting this? Great. Where is it? Can anybody from the audiences see where the window is? Solution, object, other windows, bookmark. Strange. It's not here. Okay, let me close this and reopen the solution. I don't know why it has disappeared. Any questions? Yeah, there you go. BDC Explorer. You just need to restart Visual Studio. Yeah, so the same with this BDC method details window. So if you don't have this, you can find it in View Other Windows. So what I'm going to do now is, let me pin this. I'm going to add an update method. So where I will be going is, I will be going to this BDC method details. Right? Add a method, create updater method. It creates the update method for me. And also, if you click on update, it puts a static method for me to go and code my update method in my class. So let's come to that later. So what we need to do with update? So we need to update an item for whatever ID that the user selected, right? So you go and select an item. What's going to happen? SharePoint is going to take that ID of that item, come to our code, pass the ID as a parameter. Now we go and fetch the record based on the ID. So the same thing, right? When you want to update, you have to pass the ID, update the item, send the item back to BDC. Oh, you don't have to send the item back, but you just have to get the ID and the updated item so you can match those and update in the database. Same thing what you would be doing if you're building a custom solution. So I have already a parameter added for me by the code, by the wizard. So you can see it has exactly added external product, and it's going to be of type external product ID name number. And you can see here it has a direction in, right? Oops. Yeah, so you can see here it has a direction of in. So it's coming from the list to the BDC model. And if you look into the properties of this type descriptor, you can see that updater field is true, which means that now your model recognizes these fields, whichever updater field is set to true, that the fields are updatable by the BDC model. So it understands that these are the fields. So you could have 10 fields and say that, okay, these are the 3 fields that can be updated, and these are the 7 fields which cannot be updated. So you could set that. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to go and add another parameter. And I'm going to say it as identifier, sorry, ID. And so this is going to be my identifier, right? What is my identifier? The product ID. So I select that. Now BDC model knows that this type descriptor is going to be the identifier. And what I'm going to tell, it's going to be the same entity that is being updated, right? So BDC model has to know that this is going to be the pre-updater field with which the user or the code might check for some conditions and fetch the appropriate record. Make sense? And what is my other parameter? External product. So I will have the updated external product that is coming from the list, and I have the ID that I'm supposed to go and fetch the record for. Nice and simple, right? No confusions. Once you know what you want to do, it's all clear. So I'll go back to my code. I will again insert a code snippet for update. And what this is doing again, I'll close this. So what it's doing again is going to my database using the connection string, and then it's fetching the product whose product ID is equal to the product ID, which is parameter in our case. So let's change that. And then assigns it to the external product. I think I have not copied properly, so I'll just say external product. Right. Oh, I don't have to do this. It's coming from my parameter. So this is what I update and in the SharePoint list, and that's going to come in, and I'm going to put the name and the product number, and then submit changes to database. So once I do the submit changes, link to SQL gets all the changes that we have done. So here what we have done is we have fetched the product that matches this condition, that matches the product ID, and link to SQL tracks the changes that you make on a product, on a link to SQL class. So here our class is product, so it tracks those changes. What do you do? What changes we have done? We have changed the name and the product number. So it keeps tracks of them. And then finally when I say submit the changes, it submits the change and updates the database. Yep.
I think you don't need parameter. You can get the ID from the external product.
Yeah, the problem with that is what happens is if you go and make that as pre-updater field, sometimes I have seen it's not consistent. So it's always good to know what actually you want and what is it you require to fetch the particular item. Because you have to go and fetch the item from the database. You cannot fetch it from the BDC cache or anywhere else. So if you want to fetch the item from the database, what will be your condition? Well, I want to fetch the product which matches the product ID. So what I normally do is I always add an extra parameter so it doesn't mismatch with the actual entity that is being passed, which is your updated entity. So you can have your ID and set it pre-updater field, which BDC will say that, okay, I'm not going to touch that field. I'm just going to send it to you. You do whatever you want to do with that parameter. Yep.
If I have multiple IDs,
Yep.
how is it? So I would have
Well,
one parameter too.
ID is going to be like a primary key, right? So you'll always have one ID. So ID is nothing but a primary key. You might have some extra extra type descriptors that you would like to compare with. Then you send them, you actually put them as an extra type descriptor in your update method, add parameter, and then just get it back.
How about if you've got the record as a combined primary key? So if you add the primary key, you get a passing.
So you would be you could do it in several ways. You could build a class like what we did for external product and combine the two fields into one field. Or you could say you pass in two parameters, then you concatenate those two parameters or join the two parameters and fetch that record in your code, right? So now let's see this, whether this works. So what do you guys feel building BDC models in Visual Studio? Straightforward? So one of the questions was, what if I have multiple identifiers? So the identifier refers to something like a primary key in a database. So if you have a primary key, probably you'll end up having only one primary key. So the same is with the model that you design. So you end up having one identifier. Or you could have an identifier entity, which in case what you asked for, what if I have a primary key that is identified by joining two columns or joining the value of two columns. So you could have an identifier entity which would something be similar to what we had with external product, and that would have first name, last name, and both joined as a primary key. I think the other question was, why do we need to pass this ID parameter separately for the updater method, right? So from my personal experience, what I have noticed is if you make a field, a type descriptor as a pre-updater field, then that's not consistent enough inside the entity. And what's our design actually is, we want to fetch a product which matches our product ID. And that's what we are doing. So to just just be consistent in what we do, what I always do is send an extra parameter, which is the ID. And now using that ID, I can fetch the product, and using the updated entity, I will update the values in my product. I'll create a new external list. Products. Choose my external content type. Create the list. And now you can see you have the option of editing the item. Right? Since now we added the update method, you get the option of editing the item. So now I can edit. So I'll just say adjustable races. There you go. We got the updated product. So what happened? When I click save, it went back to our code. So my code had the ID field, ID parameter for this list item. So based on that ID, I fetched my product from the database, updated the values with the new values of name and identifier, and submitted my changes back. And that's all I did, just 4 lines of code. So if I close this and go back.
Can you change that form using Infopath Designer?
Yep, exactly. So can you change this form using Infopath Designer? Yes. So you can. So now if you open SharePoint Designer, right? So what we'll do now is we'll deploy this. So things are working. So So what I have not done is creating and deleting a product. So literally you could go there, BDC method pane, add a creator method, add a deleter method, and put the link to SQL code what you want to do. So I'll probably leave you guys to do that. So it's a good thing to try it out yourself. It's not hard at all. Link to SQL makes your life easier. So I've deployed this. I'll go to my BDC service application. And meanwhile, I'll open my SharePoint Designer. So now I can see my external product here. Right? So this is the model that I deployed from Visual Studio. And if I go to my SharePoint Designer, external content types, you can see my external product, which clearly says that this symbol says that it's a custom .NET assembly. So I can click on this, then I will see everything associated with it, and also I can see the external list that's associated with it. And if I go to my list and libraries, you can see my products list, and I can design info path form. You get all the benefit that you get by creating a connector in SharePoint Designer, what we did yesterday. So you want to make this, so you have the products, everybody is happy, everybody are getting the products, but now you want to enable search on this product, right? People want to search on the products, external products. So what we saw yesterday was in SharePoint Designer, when you deploy an external content type, it is crawlable. So search service can identify that, okay, I have an external product, so now I can go and crawl this item. So if I go to my central admin, search service application, and search service application, and go to content sources, and edit this guy. So I discussed about how you do this yesterday, right? So you go if you want to perform a search on your external data, you have to create a content source, and in the content source you have to specify that you want to crawl line of business data. So what we'll do is, just to make clear, I go and create content source, and you can see the option of choosing line of business data, and then I get the option to choose my data source. So obviously you see that we don't have the external products that we just built because it's not crawlable. SharePoint Designer by default adds that property to the models so that they are crawlable. So if you click on external product, you can see here the property is set to no. But if you go back and see a model that has been deployed by SharePoint Designer, you will see the crawlable property yes. Right? So how do you make your .NET assembly crawlable? All you need to do is a very small thing, a small update to your model. So go to your model, go to your BDC Explorer, go to your LOB system instance. So that's what the SharePoint is going to interact with. And you have the option of setting custom properties, right? Go to the custom properties, add a property name, show in search UI. It took me a long time to memorize that. That's it. Don't give anything. Whatever you do, that exclamation mark doesn't go, right? You do everything. You don't get the option of clicking OK, but there's a little trick, right? Go there, press enter. It took me a long time to figure that out too. So yeah. So now we have added our property. Great. Deploy this. Adding solution. Deploy succeeded. Great. It's good to see when it succeeds. Now let me go to my BCS service application. Check whether that has updated my the content type. Still not. What I will do is No. Okay. I don't know why, but sometimes I always end up deleting the model. I'll delete this. So there are there are little things that you need to, sort of see how far you can achieve things. Like, for example, I had to delete the model as well as the external system to actually get my changes back. It might just that I'm using Windows 7. External products, delete this. Deploy again. So now, I think in PowerShell, if you use PowerShell, there is an option to override all the existing BDC model, and that's what is happening with Visual Studio. When you deploy it, it doesn't override the properties of the model. But if you use PowerShell and deploy it, I think there's an option to say override. So it doesn't matter what property currently you have, it will override with the new properties. So if I go to my model back to my model, hopefully this time it doesn't work. Great. So in situations like this, I have the actual thing that's working. And let me compare what I have done here. Show and search UI. Show and search UI. So it should pick up. I'm not sure why it's not picking up. So if I go to my search application, well, not that I would get it, but no, it's not working. What we can do, deploy it again. So I'm pretty sure that's the only change you need to add to your model. Show and search UI for your instance to make it searchable. But I'm not sure why it's not working now. No, it's not working. Why is it not working? IS reset? But it's not going to help because the model is an XML file. You don't have to give any value. Okay, so let's see whether that helps. The only value that we did give for beta was this X.
It works, you buy me beer. It does not buy you one.
Okay, I'll close my browser instance. External product. No, it doesn't work, Steve. But I'm pretty sure that's the only change you need to do, and that's what the whole documentation in MSDN2 says. Give it a try. You might have to delete all the models and clean up everything, do an IS reset, and then deploy this. I'm sure it will. So one thing to check whether that's actually set or not, you can go to your Solution Explorer, open the BDCM file with XML editor. That will give you a BDC model in XML, right? So now you can go and see whether things are set, whatever you need. So you can see it's been set. There is a property. I think what I might have done. No, it is capital. Capital U, capital I. Capital U, capital I. But I'm not sure why it's not doing it. Yeah, so give it a try. If you still don't get that, you can always email me, and I'll go and try it out. So at the bottom, you can see my email address, my blog, and the link that I gave yesterday. It's the same link, so you'll find all the resources for BCS. A lot of resources from BCS blog and MSTN. One last thing, if you want to manipulate external list. So I still had 2 topics, but I thought let me just make it simple. So if you still want to interact with your external list, the external list template ID is 600. You can use the normal SharePoint object model spweb.list.add to create external list. So you just have to use that 600, and there's a property called splist data source. So that will specify what is your entity, what is your namespace, and things like that corresponds to your external content type. If you go to my blog, I have a blog post that explains in detail how to create external list programmatically. You can use a property called has external data source on a list object to check whether that list is an external list. And you can build your camel query, the only 2 conditions being that you need to have a method tag and view fields tag. If you go to my blog, you'll again find resources on how to do this. So I'm not going to show the demo. It's already past 5 minutes. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot for coming to my session. Thank you.